a book that was recently published, last year actually, 2021, 2022. The chapter or essay is titled Rooted Woman or Root Woman at the Intersection of Earth, Faith, and Action. And next slide. We're going to get this together, he and I. I want to start, though, with just a meditative moment. We've been talking about Octavia Butler and the parable of the sower quite a bit, and the session before mine ended with a little bit of conclusion about Octavia Butler and a kind of a summary of the book, The Parable of the Sower. And one of my favorite lines from The Parable of the Sower is this one. Embrace diversity, unite, or be divided, robbed, ruled, killed by those who see you as prey. Embrace diversity or be destroyed. There is no end, and this is the second quote that I love, to what a living world will demand of you. And when you really reflect on particularly that second quote, there's no end to what a living world will demand of you, it really does help make us kind of center us into the reality that we are facing. That all around the world, different communities are experiencing different aspects and different impacts of the consequences of climate change and environmental justice, or injustice, I should say. And so recognizing that, thinking about a conversation I had with some people, gray-haired folk like me, and some of us in the room a few weeks ago. One of the ladies, it was about dealing with the conversation of, no CRT and all of this stuff that's going on in our public narrative now. And she said, I was really involved in the civil rights movement, and I thought my work was done. And now I have to start all over again. And it just makes me think about that a living world will constantly make demands on us. And that we have to be ready and willing and courageous enough to face those. And so let's just take a moment of silence to contemplate that and to think about why it's so important that we embrace diversity. So the essay that I submitted for this publication, Walking Through the Valley, a Womanist Exploration in the Spirit of Katie Geneva Cannon. And we talked about a little bit of that earlier. Dr. Cannon was taught, as you know, at Union Presbyterian Seminary for since 2001, I believe. And she passed away in 2018. I had the privilege she had what she would call the Sisters of the Yam circles. And I had the privilege of being in one of those circles for several years. I had the privilege of working with her as she designed for herself the Katie Geneva Cannon Center and that is now housed at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Richmond. And she was a delightful person. She was a pedagogue of pedagogues. She was a person who was always willing to give of herself. And she embodied, she just wasn't a theologian who did theology and did ethics, right? She didn't just write and she didn't just theorize. She lived out her theological and ethical beliefs and principles and theories. And that's the thing that I think most people love about her memory and about her, is that she showed you the way. She was definitely a heroine in so many ways, and we miss her, but we call on her name today because we know she is with us, and I truly hope she's pleased with the way that we are trying to honor the legacy that she has left with us. I encourage you to get the book and read all the essays. Read mine, too. So I'm not going to go directly from that essay. I thought I would do something a little different because I just felt like that was such a shameless plug to talk about my own essay. So I thought I would do this with this session, talk about the methodology that I used to write the essay, and then kind of weave in some of what I learned and incorporated in the essay. So I used the book, Melanie Harris's book, Eco-Womanism, African American Women and Earth Honoring Faiths. And she starts off the book with this idea of eco-womanist paradigm for African American women and Earth. And she starts off with these three main themes of the book that you can follow throughout the book. There's a collective memory of family, faith, and safety, as well as the acts of resistance to domination and subjugation that is part of eco-womanist or the eco-womanist paradigm. There's also a sense of home and reconnection to Earth. And then finally, that relationships with land, despite the trauma of slavery and the era of Jim Crow laws and practices of lynching, legalized which is autonomous with legalized white supremacy, that there is this theme of justice, right? The symbol of the scales. And so we have the symbol of home, the connection to Earth and connection to a place, and then also this idea of collective memory. And so it was intriguing to me, so I thought, as I was writing the essay and I was pulling together lots of reading and lots of research that I've done over the years, and even coursework that I've taught, and at the same time, somebody gave me a present, my genealogy, right? And so with Ancestry.com, and so I did a little swab, well, not swab, you spit into a thing, it's really gross. But sent that off and got my genealogy. So we'll talk about that. And so all of that kind of converged to help me write this chapter. So eco-womanism is a method for the recovery of an African-American environmental history. The meta-narrative of environmental history and the environmental movement is missing the experience and contributions of African and Native peoples. And it's much better now, but when I first started this work back into, really, my first foray into the conversation around climate change and caring for the Earth probably started with the inception of Earth Day, because I've got gray hair, so I remember when this all happened. I was forming my social, lens and my cultural lens at that time. So some of you were too, right? We remember when Earth Day, we remember when the EPA was started. We remember when people cared that the Cuyahoga River was on fire. We remember acid rain. We remember the ozone issue. We remember a day when this was like normal. It was normalized to care about what was going on our planet. And there wasn't this incredible pushback and misinformation campaign. And so recovering even that memory was incredibly important to me. But there is also this meta-narrative that there's also this reality that in the environmental movement of the last 30, 40 years, African and Native peoples, indigenous peoples, have kind of been left out. Immediately you think of the Audubon Society, now they're Nature Forward, you think of Sierra Club, but you don't really think of folk from the African, and maybe you do, maybe more indigenous, but oftentimes that's, sort of stereotyped indigenous folk. But the truth is there is a narrative, there is a stream of environmental connection for among Africans and African American peoples. There are three paradoxes or paradox that she raises in the book. One is the Great Migration paradox, and that was around the early 1900s. People leaving the South, the terror of the South, admit that they were leaving home, right? So for so many, leaving land, leaving family. And they arrived in cities losing their identity and sense of belonging and respect for the land and community. So many of the people coming from the South in the early 1900s going to the North were people who had been farmers and who had some deep relationship and connection to land, and definitely to the South. My family being, on both sides of my family being one, that's something I learned from my ancestry test. Beauty to burden, this idea of the gulf between the horrors of lynching bridged with spiritual intimacy to the earth. So even though the lynching tree in many ways is definitely a tree of terror, there's also something about trees and earth that also provides a spiritual connection that is also, there's this paradox. And then there's the home to homeless paradox, being ripped from homelands in Africa with the struggle to forge connections to home and land in the Americas. I've often said that prior to, well, I said this long before I did my ancestry test, but I often said, you know, for many African Americans, it's almost like we were spontaneously generated because there's no history to look back on. There's no memory. And so ancestry and some of these DNA things have been really can be a tool of healing for many. The themes in her book are belonging, birthplace, home, respect for land, and community. Belonging, of course, again, that idea of whether you were spontaneously generated, where do I actually belong? Is there a place for me? Birthplace, too, has great significance for people's health, for people's social stability. Home, where is home? Where do I make home? And what does that mean for me? And then respect for land. These are questions that I had to ask myself as I was writing my story. And then, of course, community, who are my people? What is my community? And so these are the eco-womanist themes that Melanie Harris raises, and I used in writing this essay. Eco-womanist theorizes self-love and freedom requires knowing one's identity on Earth with Earth, right? So knowing, when I learned that my father's father, well, actually my great-grandfather was a farmer, not a farm hand, but he was a farmer in North Carolina, Henderson, North Carolina. When I learned that in the DNA, through the ancestry and through the genealogy that I was able to find on the census records from the 1900s, this was 1900 census, he was a farmer, so if he was listed as that, I mean, he owned his land. That gave me so much identity. It just really made me feel like I had some connection. Okay, Henderson, North Carolina, at least I can say that. Never been there, but at least I can say, oh, there's some root there, taproot, right? That's a place where at least I know my father's father started, and my father, though he had never probably been there, had connections. The goal of self-determination is supported by social environmental enterprise. So the need for, many times for African American women, they have to find other ways to make ends meet, right? You gotta sell cakes out your kitchen. There used to be, you'd have, what do they call them? Parties, Saturday night parties. You charge people. What'd you say? That's right, rent parties to be able to pay the rent. So there were always these opportunities that were necessary. I want to call them opportunities, but opportunities that were necessary in order to make ends meet, to be able to feed your children, to be able to support the home. And that there are, it is also necessary to uncover one's environmental familial roots and spiritual connections to be whole. And that is to be healthy, to be physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually whole. Healthy is to be, or to be those things is to be whole. And so that if you don't have familial roots, if you can't name them, there's something missing. There's that sense of being spontaneously generated, not belonging, not knowing where home is, not knowing who you are. Eco-womanist ethic employs African cosmology. The idea of spirit, nature, and humanity are connected in an interdependent web of life. That's a theological premise or a cosmological premise that most indigenous African religions hold, as well as most indigenous religions around the world hold that idea, that belief. A deep respect for the earth and spirit world, of ancestors, of the Creator as normative among many indigenous Africans who prioritized an ethical mandate to live in harmony with nature. And so I took a trip to Ghana back in, my first time was in 2000, I think it was. And we went and watched a chief, a shaman, basically. He was the chief, but he was also a shaman. And we watched him do a ritual near a body of water, and people coming to him and asking for blessings and asking for, to give them some wisdom for their lives. And these were people that actually had been scattered around the world, but they had come back home to hear wisdom and get direction from their chief. And so it was a really powerful experience to watch that and to experience that. And what was interesting about, I'm sorry, I changed it again. I just changed. No, we're on the wrong one. Yes, that's it. What was interesting about that was I always tried to understand in the Hebrew Bible where it talks about the casting of lots. And the entrails, reading the entrails. Well, we watched this shaman do this, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, now I understand what was happening in the Bible. When we read that, it's not necessarily something we want to I'm not encouraging us to do that, but I'm just saying it made sense to me then, now. Eco-womanism embodies theory and practice, right? There is this deconstructive element to it, this deconstructive analysis that womanist theology and ethics requires, a debunking and demystifying of stereotypes. So we do the work of demythologizing the lies, the stories, the stereotypes, the fault maladies and the histories that have kind of created a sense of unwellness and unbeing for Black people, for African people, for people who are on the margins. And then there's this constructive approach. So after deconstructing, there must be a construction, right? So construct an approach. Utilizing theologies, practices from non-traditional sources to develop environmental and spiritual praxis. And so one of the things that if you ever read or heard anything by Dr. Cannon, you know that she would always tell the stories and unearth the stories of African women and use them as, African American women, and use them as to find their ethical values and to use those values to craft a new ethic and a new religious perspective. And then, so that's the construction part of it. And then it explores the links between climate, violence, white privilege, the historical impact of white supremacy in the United States and globally, and the environmental exploitive capitalist economic system. And so my essay, I used all of these in the essay, and if you have a chance to read it, you'll see how it works there. Race, class, and gender critique. Racism shapes environmental policy, perspective, and understanding. So that's a part of a critique that you take to the reading of the text, but reading of the text of life as well. Assumptions about economic class, privilege shapes environmental outlook. So understanding that the way that we approach the issues of climate change is often based on our class in our world, right? So a poor person's a person who is trying to figure out how to make ends meet. It's frustrating for me, right? When I'm trying to talk to people about what's happening in their backyard, you're being poisoned, but they're at the same time getting a job at the new poisoned, hoping for a job at the new place that's also going to poison their community. Why? Because they have different needs. They're coming from a different need. So I'm coming from, in some ways, a privileged place to talk to them about the pipeline that's going to go across their children's elementary school only 10 feet away. They're thinking, oh, my children can go to that school. Gendering the earth as mother, feminine fosters domination and subjugation. So recognizing that the way that we talk about Mother Earth in some ways is a gendering of earth, and in some ways impacts not only the way that we exploit earth, because we are really exploitive of our mothers, let's be honest. They do everything for us in many ways. And we're not always as gracious and grateful for the sacrifices that mothers make. But also the idea that, that if we can dominate the earth, we can dominate also the feminine part of our world, the women in our world. And that's not just black women, that's all women. Feminine culture and environment are parallel oppressions. And the analysis uncovers innate solidarity between women and the earth. Not that women are more earthy, because that's a stereotype, but that there is a way in which women have had to call on earth, to be in solidarity with earth to survive. And because in many ways, women have been associated with the earth. The way the black bodies of enslaved women were raped, dominated, exploited, and the way the earth is dominated, exploited, and raped, there are these similarities, right? And so that's an analysis and a critique that we must make. And in my critique, in my essay, you'll see, as I'm looking back and finding, the genealogy, my father's, my great-grandfather, his father, his father, and well, it was not his father, my great-grandfather married a woman named, gosh, I forgot her name. Her last name is Weish, and she is so she would be my great-grandmother, but she is the daughter of one of my her father is the grandchild of the slave owner who owned my third great-grandfather. So my fourth great-grandfather was a slave owner. And he sired 7 children by an unknown African slave. And those children, at his death in 1848, were disseminated and given to his other 7 white children. And so those children they are actually the exploitation of the body of this African woman. And that was eye-opening, and it was also quite, I think I was stunned for about a year when I saw that in the records of North Carolina, in his estate records, actually. Eco-womanist methodology loves the spirit, acknowledges, leaves room for the mystical while maintaining a critical interdisciplinary analysis. So recognizing that both spirit and critique are important. You cannot have just one. You need both. And it's connected to intellectual lineage and history of African American mysticism and folk religion. And then there's also the prophetic spirit and prophetic wisdom, which give voice to the speaker, the reader, the student, and the scholar of eco-womanism. And so there are these three methodologies that are working together to help formulate my essay. So Eco-Woman honors the experience and story is the first step and source for eco-womanist ethics and theology. So telling that story of my father's side, but on my mother's side, they were Virginians, Amherst County, Virginia. I couldn't go back as far with them in the historical record or in the census record, partly because Virginia had a fire and many of the records were lost. But I do know, I have been able to find some family members who were not only children, they were brothers and sisters of my grandmother. So they were living in Pittsburgh, and we went to visited and met in Amherst last year, and went to visit Monticello. I couldn't think of it. Went to visit Monticello, and we went out to dinner and lunch, and we just had a great time. And these are people that I never knew, but these were my family members. So these eco stories and these finding out and following these sources has really helped to create a memory, recreate a memory that I may not have ever had. It was in my bones, it's in my DNA, but it was never in my experience or in my mind. So these eco stories and eco theologies, earth stories and eco memories of Black women's experience with nature. My mother always talked about, and this is also in my essay, my mother always talked about she's, a child of the Depression, right? She's a child, she remembers she was alive and growing up during the Second World War, and they had a victory garden, right? And she used to talk about how she would get vegetables out of that victory garden. Mainly, she talked about how she would get potatoes and how they'd put it in the fireplace and they would cook it and they would eat it, and how good these tasted. And I could taste it, I could smell it when she'd tell these stories. And though she didn't have a memory of Virginia, right? She never lived on a farm, although my mother's family did own land in Virginia, and I learned of that when my grandmother died. And I heard all her brothers and sisters and my mother's brothers and sisters arguing about who's going to pay the taxes. And then at the end of the argument came this fateful declaration, well, we'll just let it go. And we're talking about 160 acres of land that they let go because nobody was willing to pay the taxes. That was the loss of home, right? That was that loss of identity, loss of that connection. They were all from Pittsburgh. They never went home to Amherst. So eco-spirituality, earth-honoring faith, or earth spiritual act, that if they had that, they would never have let it go. Earth spiritual activism are valid epistemologies for environmental discourse. They reveal earth justice as a primary value, often passed down from one generation to the next, as a family and communal legacy. So as I was doing this study and learning all these things, it was beginning to kind of come together for me that I do have a home, I do have a place, I do belong. However, it also really, I had a great sense of loss and mourning because that was a lot of land that I like to garden now, right? The first thing we did when we bought our house is we started a garden. I had no clue how to grow anything. I grew up in New Jersey, even though it's the garden state. We never had a garden, but that was the first thing we did. And my husband, fortunately, did grow up with a garden, so he could figure out things and remember for himself how to do it. But I had no clue, and so we kind of found our way there. But I always felt good, and I always felt that connection to that victory garden that my mother used to talk about that my grandmother had in Pittsburgh. Exploring eco-autobiography, and so this is now my biography is coming together. The recovery of the recovery of eco-memory. I left my glasses somewhere. Here. Recovery of eco-memory empowers African Americans to self-determination and to act for earth justice. And I was already doing environmental justice work, but it only gave me more commitment and made me more committed to do this work, not just for me, but for the people who I know also had lost those connections, right? They have forgotten. Those are memories that need to be unearthed. Recognition of the innate beauty and goodness of self in relationship to all beings. It does. One of the early articles I read, I was taught a class at Virginia Union for several years on earth care and grassroots organizing. And one of the articles I read, I found it was a really obscure article, but it was about a scientist who was doing this work with microbes, and he was talking about how his findings were showing that as people put their hands in the soil, that microbes actually kind of create a chemical reaction in your body and cause you to release endorphins. And so he was trying to think about how that can be used to help heal people who were recovering from drug addiction and children who have had trauma. And the beauty of that, and it was so exciting to me, and I was like, oh gosh, the earth can actually heal us. We can actually, be connected to the earth in a way that typically we just really don't know. Maybe that's why farmers are so happy. Recognition of a deep power of being, recovery of a knowing, and happy when their crops don't fail. Okay, so they have a lot of reason not to be happy right now. But there's something really wholesome about doing that kind of work and being in nature and seeing life come out of the earth that way, and taking your part in it. Recognition of the deep power of being, recovery of a knowing and a sense of belonging, connection to all beings and the earth community helps to heal the dehumanizing influences. And that is definitely what I experienced with not only the research, the genealogical research, but also with the gardening and getting my hands in the soil. Recognition of the interconnectedness of earth community, or rather all of life. And so, next slide. And then filling in the gaps of environmental history, or is it reconstituting history by challenging false generalizations and gross stereotypes found in the U.S. history? So this is some of the essay does that. I try to address some of the things that we have kind of sometimes leave out in not only just history, but not generally history, but history of climate movement. Counter memory centers African American perspectives, voices, and experiences in environmental history, recognizing not just people like George Washington Carver, but recognizing that the civil rights movement, the ministers and the people in civil, they were like Fannie Lou Hamer. She was a pig farmer and a farmer. I mean, she had serious connection to the earth. She was an entrepreneur. There was so much about her that really resonated with me, and this eco-womanism. She would probably not know what that term meant, but she definitely is a perfect demonstration and example of it. And that there's an interdisciplinary analysis that weaves in art and literature and ethics and geography and agriculture. So all of that is part of the eco-womanist methodology. It employs a prophetic justice hermeneutic, so reading the Bible, reading our theology from a lens that is prophetic, and that's from a Black folk reading a biblical narrative pattern. We start with covenant, with God, with earth, but also recognizing that that covenant has been broken by us and others. Then we're restored by our conviction that we're convicted, and so we're restored. And then we're called to return to that covenant. And so back to a sense of that respect for earth as given to us by a loving and benevolent creator. Critical reflection of African American women's eco-memory surfaces. So there's this two meanings of bound. Bound as tethered, trapped to never-ending toil of the earth. With some of my enslaved ancestors were tethered to the earth that way. But also there's this bound as connected to a divine relationship through the earth. Alice Walker talks about, and in Melanie's book, Alice Walker talks about how her mother had these ability to grow these she had this incredible garden, but she grew flowers as well. And that people would come from miles around just to see, and she was a sharecropper, but the little plot of land that she had to grow food, and she also grew flowers, and that was something that she loved seeing and knowing about her mom. Connection to the calming, healing rhythms of the earth at the same time marked by horrors of lynching and slave oppression. So recognizing that when we get our hands into that soil, when we connect to the earth, not only doing gardening, but even, falling asleep on the porch and waking up and feeling like you've had a vacation because the bird sang to you, the breeze caressed your face, just having that connection, being in that rhythm with earth. And then, and camping has done that for me too. I started camping probably about 40 years ago, did my first wilderness camp in Loon Lake, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where we had to put our backpacks and food and toothpaste and everything up in trees so that the bears would not come out, so we could miss the bears, tearing up our food or attracting them to camp. Community as a primary eco-womanist value, so community is incredibly important. I said that earlier, that's the work that I feel like, that's the main work that I do as a director of Virginia IPL. I'm trying to create community with the people that we are seeking to serve. Not just tell them about climate change, but create community where we can grow and develop together. And then improvisation. The genius of African peoples is to persist and survive and thrive in spite of, right? So there's always another way. Making a way out of no way is one way that it is said. It's one of the adages in our community. Eco-memory, tools and critique analysis. So of course we start with social location. This is a liberation theology ethic, right? Environmental experience, problematizes the normative claims of white normativity and white supremacy. People of color have a different entry point to environmental justice. They were the raw materials of economic colonization. Recognizing that, I often hear from many of my collaborative partners, like black people that aren't really interested in this. Well, it's because they start somewhere different than you do, right? So recognizing that and starting at that same entry point. Working and living conditions, that's, incredible tool to try to figure out how do we create a just, thriving world that we can all enjoy. So talking about equity, recreational activities, camping and outdoor yoga and swimming and all the things that can connect us back to earth. And actually, I've heard it said that sometimes the best way to ignite a person's interest in caring for the environment and caring for the earth is to get them outside and get them involved in some kind of recreational activity. Biking, boating, fishing, something. That's where you can start. And then quest to recover traditional skills and cultural practices, recaptured and reinstated. And then it leads to autonomy, self-determination, land rights, and civil human rights. And so that's the stages of the critique. And then finally, I'm going to end with this proverb that the old Lakota was wise. He knew that man's heart away from nature becomes hard. He knew the lack of respect for growing living things soon led to a lack of respect of humans too. And so I think that so for me and my story, recognizing how critically important the disconnect that happened, the loss of identity, the loss of home, the loss of belonging, the loss of purpose, the loss of connection for people who left the South and moved north because of the terrors of Jim Crow. There's a lot of pain and PTSD resident in the African American communities that often are critiqued and stereotyped as something's wrong with those people, right? But in reality, there's a lot to uncover, and the work of doing that can lead us to really igniting a new commitment among Black and brown peoples, indigenous peoples, in ways that we probably haven't tapped it well yet. I would like to see a movement to the level of the civil rights movement among African American faith communities. And that's one of the things that our organization is attempting to work at. So, any questions or thoughts?
Do you want me to get a microphone?
If you have any questions, either raise your hand or just put it in the chat. Just speak up, yeah. Do you see a question there in the room?
Yes.
Faith, in
Yes,
addition to
there's a
the
question
people
in
in
the
the room,
room.
there are more than 20 people watching online.
There's a question in the room.
I have a question about your statement, gendering the earth as mother. I'm sorry, I just took my glasses off. Fosters dominance and subjugation.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's the white male who fosters dominance and subjugation of the earth. So tell me your take on this and why you call it feminism.
Well, it's part of this. It's part of the patriarchy, absolutely, and part of the whole of white supremacy, right, and white male patriarchy. But it comes out. It's significantly in this conversation. It's significantly demonstrated in the way that it worked out in slavery, in the during chattel slavery, right. And the idea of women as being either stereotypically more in tune with the earth, more animalistic, women generally, not just Black women, but all women, right? Less sophisticated, less civilized in some ways, needing to be civilized, right, by religion, fathers, husbands. That is what, and so when we talk about Mother Earth, it comes along with that, right? It's not necessarily Mother Earth created it, but the fact that that is already part of the narrative, the way we talk about women and what feminine role and who women are, and what they're supposedly like. When we talk about the Earth as Mother Earth, we are attributing those same characteristics. Wild, needs to be tamed. Remember, remember the 1900s, man versus Earth. We're going to conquer the Earth. We're going to get rid of mosquitoes, DBT. What is that? Is it DBT? DDT, yes. We're going to, cut down and civilize and tame. We're going to get rid of certain creatures, that are dangerous, So it's all part and parcel with that way of thinking. The idea that the earth is something to be tamed and dominated and exploited for what it can give you, how it can serve you. And that is very much the role that women have been given in our society. Yeah.
Are there other questions for Faith? Other comments or observations?
No, I'm just really thankful for the opportunity to talk about, how I came to write this essay. And I didn't talk about one of my conversation discourse partners is Walter Brueggemann, who in his book Sabbath as a Culture of Now, Sabbath Rest, I can't remember the title, as Resistance to the Culture of Now, yes, that's it. And I feel like that book is there was a good deal of section in the essay about how his critique of Egypt, right, of the enslaved Hebrews in Egypt and what they experienced is very much what we're experiencing today, right? This culture of acquisition, this culture of greed and lust, and the bottom line as the very most important value for corporations, for governments, it's almost like gospel for people to say, well, is that going to make money? Or is that going to cost us? Yes, taking care of people costs money, right? Taking care of life it's going to cost us one way or the other. It's going to cost us financially, or it's going to cost us our lives and our homes and our ability to have peace, because we are headed for massive disruption if we do not meet those goals, right? If we don't meet those goals. So it's going to cost us. It's just, a calculation of how do we want to pay. So I really appreciate this idea of Sabbath. I argue that it is actually the social economic system that was created by God. Like the idea of resting one day a week or whenever, or resting from making money, exploiting, giving creatures and servants and all classes the same equity, right? Everybody is treated the same. It flattens the idea of the elite, of an elite over, right? Because I'm the same as you on that day, right? My cow is the same, has the same right to rest. It makes you have to think about how important God thought about all of creation. And I also add in there, I didn't do this here, but also just about how Genesis does that as well, right? The idea of the story of in Genesis 1 where, is it 1 or 2, where the animals are brought to the earthman, and he has to decide which one is going to be a good helpmate. A tiger? Come on, that can't be the reason, right? If we use our thinking minds, right? The reason has to be something's important about this connection. You need to know what's in the world. You need to have appreciation. There's something more there than I'm looking for a helpmate for the, a tiger, a bear, a gorilla could never be the elephant, could never be the helpmate, right? Could never be the one to partner with the earth one. So I just think it was a delightful, it was really a delightful process writing this essay, and I hope that I hope you get a chance to read it. And there's really a lot of great essays in this book, so don't just read mine. Are there any other questions or comments, or Shamal?
I just wanted to mention something to you. I don't think it's too off topic, but several years ago I read this book called Farming While Black by Leah Penniman, who is a woman.
Yes, that's a
And
great book.
I have given that book away as a gift many times to some of our urban farmers in the urban farming movement. But if I remember correctly, it is about how African Americans historically and traditionally were farmers.
Yes.
And how they were connected to the earth.
Yes.
And how when they lost that connection of the earth, what you call putting your hands in the soil, how they were uprooted.
Yes.
And how much that impacted then what happened for generations, and how now they are returning to the earth. So do you want to say a little bit about that? I hope that's not too off topic.
No, it's not off topic at all, and that's actually the theme of the essay is just, and what I learned about my own family being uprooted, and my father's side of the family, he is what in that 1900 census, his children were grown children, married. They all left and went to Pittsburgh together. I don't know why. Right? What happened? A lot of times that would happen because they were driven off their land. Sometimes it would happen because somebody was threatened to be lynched or something else going on. I don't know the story. I'm still trying to research that. But they went to Pittsburgh, arrived around 1915. My mother's side of the family, their parents didn't go, but all the brothers and sisters went to Pittsburgh around 1915. And there is this, as I said, my generation, right? I'm my mother's child. She grew up in an urban setting. She had the Victory Garden, but she didn't have any idea of living off the land and being connected to the land in the way that I'm sure her ancestors did. And then, of course, that was the work that enslaved people did. They farmed. Not only did they pick cotton and grow rice and those kinds of things, but they also grew the food for the plantation. And so they knew, and also thinking about the people that came directly from Africa certainly had those skills, right? They weren't novices to growing and caring for the earth. So, and they had those connections. So, yes, I think the movement, mass movement. There were millions of people who left the South from about 1900 to about it was like the 1930s, and now people are moving back to the South. But yes, that is very true. And I think there is a disconnect, and that's why when I was talking about in the last session, we got this grant to do this with the city of Richmond to do tree planting and create green spaces and to do workforce development. We're going to try to develop a certification for arborists to take care of these trees. but not only for arborists, but also for lawn care experts, because anybody can buy a lawnmower and say, oh, well, I do lawns, but they don't necessarily know. I used to have to fight with our lawn care person to stop cutting my grass to 1 inch and stop putting chemicals on, so teaching, making sure that we have like a pipeline of new folk to care for the earth is part of what this grant will be doing with this grant. So it's $6 million, and there are 4 organizations and the city of Richmond going to be working together to do this. I'm so excited about this because it gives us an opportunity for that next generation, the people with the strong backs that can do this work, right? To find good work that can heal them emotionally, spiritually, and physically and mentally as well, and that they can share this with their communities. I'm so amped about this, getting this grant. So yes, I do agree with you. That is really, that's a really an important, important observation. So if there are no other questions, I'm going to take my leave. I'm going to exit stage left as, who was that?
Excuse me, I have a question I put in the chat.
He's asking for the name of your the book that your essay is
Oh,
in,
okay.
and also your presenter contact information. So I'm putting that you're with Virginia Interfaith Power and Light.
So it's F. Harris, F as in Frank, Harris, last name Harris, at vaipl.org. And then the title of the book is Walking Through the Valley, Exploration, I closed my thing, Exploration of Womanist Ethics of Katie Geneva Cannon, or something like that. The title of my essay is titled Root Woman. Oh, thank you. Somebody read that. Let me see. Walking Through the Valley. Yeah, Walking Through the Valley. Womanist Explorations in the Spirit of Katie Geneva Cannon. And my essay is titled Root Woman or Rooted Woman. The intersection of faith. I'm a little brain dead. It's in the book. Get the book and read all the chapters. It's really a great book. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for your patience and for being here. Such a great audience. Yeah. I'm a little hungry and sleepy now.
Hello,
So I'm a
online
little brain
friends.